So I would now invite Mr. Connor Gray, who is the Chief Strategy Officer at Campus Management Corp, to give a presentation as to how his experience of steering through around 2,000 universities and institutions in 26 countries, how the top-notch institutions are really catering to these issues, and can technology really become a trailblazer for accentuating all-round excellence in higher education. I would request Connor to give his presentation at this occasion.
You know, the comments that have been made to this point, and I know that we kind of started out with some conversation about whether or not, you know, education was, in fact, an industry. And I can tell you that, you know, probably based on just sort of market forces and general economic principles, you know, almost everything, even sort of some of the things that we typically think of as public sector activities, always ultimately get driven by certain supply and demand pieces. I mean, we talked just a few moments ago about the real needs for making India relative to India, and the importance of that sort of just from the core infrastructure and backbone perspectives of this country. A few things that I think are very interesting about higher education, and if you think about what some of the impacts of global changes have been in other industries, you know, companies like Google didn't even exist not that very long ago. And particularly within higher education, where we probably haven't seen as dramatic of changes in the last 100 years, there's a lot of forces in play today that fundamentally can reshape higher education. In the very first section, our first speaker talked about some of those dynamics, and I actually think that I'm going to end up hitting on a number of those things yet again. And change is a thing that, you know, you see a lot of. One of the things is that if you look at just things like sports, I know the day that we were talking about cricket, but if you think back to things like the Olympics, there was a great American swimmer, Mark Spitz, that existed back in the 70s. And he went to the Olympics and he won, I believe, 7 different gold medals. And if you look at his times that all set world records at that moment, those records today would not have even qualified him to be in the finals of those Olympics that we most recently had. And yet this person was at his time considered to be one of the greatest Olympic athletes ever. And it just sort of underlies the idea that change happens and you're constantly needing to improve from where you've been in the past. You know, there was a book called, you know, Who Moved My Cheese?, which is about a rat that continues to go to the same place, believing that, in fact, that he's going to find the cheese there, even though the cheese is fundamentally moved. And if you look at the market transformation drivers going on within higher education, at campus management, what we've seen is sort of focused around 4 different areas. One is fundamentally the changes that are going on from a delivery perspective. The ability to deliver education through a number of different mechanisms beyond just having a student sitting in a classroom has dramatically reshaped the industry and the potential of how higher education can be delivered to the prospective students. Knowledge can be acquired and skills be attained. Secondly, we also see tremendous forces at play relative to competition. Competition not just between the institutions for inbound students, which is certainly a dimension of it. One of the earlier speakers talked about the raw material that you get as part of that input, but then also what you're able to do with it, and the competition that exists amongst institutions from one another relative to what they're able to achieve. And the third aspect of this is around governance and compliance. And so in India, as well as in a lot of the other geographies that we have in place, there's a certain amount of governmental policy change that's occurring within those industries. I wouldn't necessarily refer to it as deregulation, but oftentimes re-regulation of those industries in terms of, how do they work, how do they operate, how are they funded, and all those dynamics tend to be at play not only in India, but in other places that we see as well, that tends to reshape how governance and compliance is achieved within those institutions. The last aspect of this that I would say that we collectively kind of pull together to talk about the superstorm that's going on is around outcomes and the pressures on institutions to improve upon the outcomes that they achieve. In the United States, one of those outcomes is the graduation rates of the inbound students. The interesting thing is someone mentioned about some of the IITs, which I was visiting here not too long ago, and one of the deans there was talking and relayed the story that I remember from my youth at college is look to the left, look to the right, one of you won't be here next year. And today, at least in many institutions, that's being viewed as a completely unacceptable outcome. That in fact the institution has a responsibility to those prospective inbound students to see that in fact that they're successful in their academic pursuit. Another aspect of this that outcomes that we see is the perspective that the result of that education actually results in something that translates into meaningful income for the investment that's made by the student. Those four forces, any one of which could serve to reshape an industry. But yet higher education is actually seeing all four of these dimensions happening at one time. And fundamentally, if you think about what do the next 10 to 20 years in higher education mean, there's a tremendous amount of disruptive factors occurring that could see tremendous amounts of change relative to things like the rankings. I know a lot of institutions talk about sort of where they rank. Well, if you think about the fact that you've got so many dynamics occurring within the industry, the opportunity for institutions that may not even exist today to catapult themselves into a very elite status actually probably exists more so today than it ever has. A couple of other things that we see that I'd like to just touch upon is the generational shift that's occurred. Some of the people mentioned that, from a values and ethics, and I think we probably go through this in history, is, the values and ethics of our youth. But one of the things to think about is also just the aspect which this is a new generation that's been reshaped by a number of factors, the first of which I would suggest is that they've always known an internet. Today's prospective inbound students, the internet has always existed. If I wanted to have access to information, all I need to do is Google it. And they're very comfortable with the idea of technology. Today in the United States, a lot of our students actually are issued tablets now in school and are very comfortable with the idea of using that as a learning platform for which to acquire information. And if you look at all the students today running around campus with smartphones, very similarly, they're texting one another, their levels of interaction, their communications have all made them where, they're very attuned to a different learning experience, a different life experience, and a different cultural experience as a result. And we need to think about that in terms of how does that potentially reshape and influence how we pursue higher education. Similarly, there's a ton of change happening relative to how much more pervasive that's even going to become. Companies like Google, which actually was the company I was with before I joined campus management, Eric Schmidt has projected that they're going to put another 5 billion users in place in the next decade. We're going to have the pervasiveness and the amount of connectivity that people have access to is only going to continue to grow. Another aspect of this is within institutions is around the idea of the customer, which I kind of go back to one of the earlier speakers when they were talking. You know, in academics, you know, we probably think first and foremost there's a customer. In many institutions, you know, kind of the academic side of this is you really don't want to even have to recognize that there is one. But the next place that a lot of institutions have gone to historically has been, well, the customer is viewed then as the academic staff and faculty. And there's been a sort of an evolution that occurred, which is that no, the customer is actually then the student and the family and the people making the choices about which institution that they're going to attend and the money and where they're going to send their money. But as been touched on here even today is the evolving trend to view that the customer ultimately is maybe the employer and the place where the student actually can get the outcome that they went to the institution to initially achieve. We also see a number of changes relative to the future of higher education from the perspective of, and I think one of the earlier speakers also talked about kind of that unbundling and rebundling aspect that's occurring. Where today you can sort of take courses as a service to kind of follow the software as a service vernacular, where everything today is turning into something as a service, whether it's infrastructure as a service, software as a service, management as a service. You can kind of think about education following those same patterns. And so there's courses that can be delivered as a service. And we've seen that across MOOCs, but we're also seeing it more and more on a global basis relative to ongoing workforce development, even executive education, where education isn't something that you just do between the ages of 18 and 22, but something that becomes a lifelong pursuit, and where people are going back to school to get advanced certificates, different information and knowledge that they're needing real time. Interestingly enough, most of the statistics on the uses of MOOCs is that the people using them the most are people that already have degrees, which really gets into that lifelong pursuit of information and knowledge. The other thing that we're seeing is sort of in the context of education as a service, where we're seeing many changes happening from hybrid delivery models, where people are now incorporating technology in terms of how that's being utilized in the classroom, and from the perspective of the advancement of online education. And then the last aspect of that is more the rebundling, which is the portability of credits across institution and the ability to bring those things back together where that person is then conferred a degree. One of the places that we're seeing in the United States is around competency-based programs, where essentially credit for classwork is demonstrated based upon the achievement of learning outcomes and the competencies that were the objective of the course. So as a result, many institutions are implementing technology to help to streamline those workforces and enable those types of different models. One of the problems that we see across many institutions are people that are in charge, but they're not in control. And technology is being utilized to essentially streamline those workflows and institutionalize how work is to be conducted and to be able to monitor that through the use of technology rather than having to manage and follow up to make sure that many of those activities are occurring. A couple of examples that I wanted to give to illustrate some of these changes. This particular one comes from a U.S. institution at Penn State. And the interesting thing here is I was on a panel recently with one of the people at Penn State, and she was referring to the fact that when they look back at the historical definition of what constituted a traditional student, the student that comes in when they're 18, moves on campus, lives in the dorm, that less than 20% of their current population of students conforms to that traditional definition. And that in fact, 80% of their students are something other than that. And this is one of the Research One institutions that shows up on a lot of these rankings. The other aspect of this is that over 50% of their students now take at least one online class as part of their overall curriculum, from a point that started just years ago where that was zero, and is only projected to continue to grow. Another phenomenon that we've seen is the growth of online programs, and again, sort of the ability to reshape institutions that for all practical purposes didn't even exist. So one of those institutions is one called Grand Canyon University, which is probably one you've never heard of. They were actually founded in 1949, and they hovered at around 5,000 students for literally decades. And then with the advancement of online programs, has seen phenomenal growth. Similarly, another institution that was founded as recently as 1999 started from basically zero and grew to over 50,000 themselves. If we look at some of the various sort of capabilities, maturity models across higher education, typically what we see is them falling into sort of three various areas focused around rankings, growth, and then their institutional efficiency. The rankings tend to be mostly products of their history. Growth is typically focused very tactically around the expansion of their applicant pool, and efficiency is really measured in terms of their ability to achieve compliance. And what you'll see from this chart is that they begin to move their mindset from a much more tactical perspective to a much more strategic or transformation perspective. Those capabilities that are needed and the outcomes that they're looking to achieve are much different in terms of those of how that progression in thought pattern exists. As a result of a lot of these factors, and we're seeing it in markets. In fact, it was mentioned earlier about kind of the state of a lot of private institutions here. Some of them are in fact going out. Many of them are just now coming into existence. But we're seeing a case where, certainly probably those elite institutions are immune to a lot of the factors that I just talked about. When you've got 10,000 applicants chasing after one seat in a classroom, right, it's a very different problem than many other institutions that don't have that elite status have. But the fundamental thing is that with all these disruptive factors, it's really a transform or perish perspective. Companies like the Yellow Pages that used to exist would have never imagined that Google would have effectively eliminated their category of business, and that they would no longer exist as companies for all intents and purposes. And we live ultimately in an on-demand era where those generation of students are fundamentally different, and the institutional expectations of how they need to transform themselves are changing as well. And that's really one of the aspects of which campus management is focused, in helping those institutions to be able to move beyond a lot of the tactical capabilities that they've traditionally sought into much more strategic and transformative capabilities. We've made a lot of investments, particularly to support our global presence through things like a partnership that we have, that we're now the only global ISV for the Microsoft Dynamics product. And we're leveraging Microsoft technology, and sort of one of the sayings of our chief architect is standing on the shoulders of giants, right? And really leveraging underlying capabilities that they provide to us. We've established and moved beyond this sort of outsourcing model that we had historically in India to where we're really focused on the India as a market, and have established a number of different institutions as flagship customers for us in this region, and recently announced the establishment of our international headquarters operations based in Bangalore. And we also recently, or actually I think just coming out this week, are announcing acquisition of a local company to help bolster our capabilities around the expertise that's needed for localized products and the expertise relative to the support of those governance and compliance aspects of what does it mean to be an institution in India. We've been focusing around, from a capabilities perspective, delivering against cornerstones that we think and believe that each institution needs in order to be successful as they move forward into this new era. And with that, I want to close and appreciate your attention for this session.
I think Connor's presentation has laid bare a lot of concepts and terminologies which we might like to comment on or seek clarification on. So I just open the forum for a few questions and comments on this entire concept where student is being treated as a customer and education as an industry, or the entire on-demand model paradigm which he is suggesting towards, where a course is a service. Probably in the Upanishadic era, a student had a question and he asked it, and that's why knowledge used to transfer. So maybe I want to learn something on business analytics. Today there was a news that IIT Kharagpur, IIM Kolkata and ISI have tied up together to create 3 institutions tying up together to create a course on business analytics, a 1 semester long course. So probably things have started moving in that direction where the knowledge is transforming over there. So I just open it to the forum out here for comments and questions and things like that. Maybe Professor Bhattacharya would like to just put up his.
Okay, but it all depends on social awareness. If we offer it, there are quite a few organizations which offer online courses, online degrees. But I'm not sure whether our industry is ready to accept those products. So far as the quality, generally we are too traditional. We take too much time to change. But this is definitely coming, that's sure.
I mean, thank you. One of the things I find interesting, and as we were sitting here and earlier somebody was talking about Make in India, right? And I believe in the section in the north, Raj actually commented that it was more of a it was a marketing slogan that needed to be turned into something real. One of the things that I find interesting is the gentleman from the Navy or the Air Force pointed out earlier is the private sector putting IT on the map. And one of the things that I find interesting is we consume, as part of our company, employees that were trained to be software engineers from India. And they were trained in the educational system that exists here. And so I actually take it to the extreme and say, why isn't India looking to make education in India for the world? Right? I mean, you're sitting here on transformative technologies for which you're, as a country, one of the technological, it's the place that we've got competitive advantage here locally. Why aren't we exploiting that? Right? And the foundation of those institutions in terms of how to be exporters of education. You've got the ability to deliver content on a global scale, and why are we not taking advantage of that? So, that would actually be, one aspect of it. The other thing is that interestingly, the lady at Penn State was much more sort of from an instructional design perspective. And one of the findings from the Penn State exploration into MOOCs and other things of online learning is it actually forced them to get back into the roots of how do I teach teachers to teach? And how do I get students to be engaged? And many of the concepts that they've actually learned from online learning have been used now in terms of how they're improving, how they actually deliver and teach in the classroom. Because engaging a student online is significantly more difficult, right? And it forces you to utilize techniques to engage those students in terms of what you're delivering and expecting them to gain as a result of that experience. Other questions? Yes, sir. Uh-oh.
I think from Indian perspective, as far as technology, utilization of technology is concerned, you showed in one slide that 20% of students conform to the historic definition of traditional student in the US.
Mm-hmm.
Here it is not like that. It's 80% is my assumption. 80% of students conform still to the technology of the historical definition of what a traditional student is. We haven't, and similarly, even the slide which says that 50% take online courses in the US, we are still evolving. So only when these things, they'll take time. As we evolve, I think it will take time for all these higher education systems here to come to that standard. That's just an observation.
Oh, I think you're absolutely right. And part of the point of including a few of those comments and slides was, one, to bring in the perspective of, what's happening globally and stimulate some of the conversation around what does that mean locally. I think, you undoubtedly need to consider the local context within, how do you execute these strategies. But at the same time, you can't deny a lot of the global trends. Who would have, so that would be just, the one observation is that the ability to sort of transform how that's done, how it's delivered, and how that's utilized has changed. If you think about, what's my need, a lot of the investment that we see in institutions, particularly here in India, is they're looking to grow. The investment's really in terms of, constructing a new building. The interesting thing is that when I asked Grand Canyon University, you've achieved this phenomenal growth, what do you really attribute it to? Their response was our on-campus experience. That the online learner actually valued the ability to come to that institution and to be part of something that was real, tangible, and sustainable. But your ability to kind of leverage that asset into something much more productive, there's tremendous opportunity that's presented through technology in terms of how you're able to achieve that. And that's why, a lot of that, when I presented the one chart about sort of the view of very tactical versus strategic versus transformative pressures or needs, a lot of that is really about what do you need in the future if you think about how you're going to transform your institution.
Professor Sadgopan, just a closing remark on comment.
Okay, so thank you for the opportunity. It's kind of nice because currently we have a prof from Penn State visiting us for 2 weeks. He happens to be my PhD advisor. So it's kind of interesting. Still not on, right? Okay. Okay. So I think one of the important stuff you mentioned about this 2080, and then there was a comment, it may not be true. Okay. It's kind of very difficult to kind of get on, because what happens is that large number of people who are assembled here, okay, we do have a certain amount of disconnect from our own students, even though we are meeting them every day. I'll give you one data point. About a year back, we have a rule in the institute. People talked about the rules. The rules are important. So if there is an exam for 2 hours, the final end semester examination, the student cannot enter after 20 minutes are over. Okay? So the idea is if a person is not serious enough, we should not let him. So one student came 22 minutes late. So he was not allowed. And he walked into my office, thought that, he can appeal to the head of the institute. And I told him that, look, okay, I think what the instructor has done is correct. So this is what the rule is. And it is actually meant so that people take the exam seriously. And then he shocked me by saying, Prof, I'm not complaining that you are not allowing me to take the exam. You are following the rule. It is right. But I am actually complaining about something else. I said, what is that? He said, look, IIITB, everything is online. Our registration is online, courses are online, schedules are online, everything is online. And you all have access to my mobile number, everything else. Okay, I should have got a reminder service 2 hours before, 1 hour before, and 20 minutes before. What I'm saying is, we just don't know them. That's what it is. I was shocked. But of course, I tell you, a lot of times, one of the good things of being a teacher, understanding this one is, I told him that, look, I completely agree with you. Okay, we have to have that service, but we will exempt you from taking the exam. Stay for 48 hours. Make an app to make this possible. I will expose the API. And in 24 hours, he made it. I think as long as we kind of empower them, empathize them, and of course I asked them about the online. He said, look, sir, we may do a lot of things online, but we still want to confront you with questions like this. For this, we want to be present. So it is not that it is going to be one vis-a-vis other, each complementing the other. So routine things, put it online.
Absolutely.
But this kind of amazing intellectual connects, amazing people connects, will continue to be there as long as human beings are there. So I am not worried about my job. I can tell you, anyone in this room, for the next several centuries, teachers need not be worried about their jobs as long as they do teach.
Yes.
Thanks a lot, sir.
There's absolutely nothing I can do to follow that up. Thank you very much.